It's important not to fall for appearances. Looking closely, the Third Reich's project of repeating the Blitzkrieg's victory in the West, but this time in the East, started to show problems in the very first weeks of the gigantic confrontation. 61 On this, the diaries of Joseph Goebbels are revealing. In the immediate lead-up to the assault he stresses the unstoppable might of the imminent German attack, without a doubt the most powerful the world has ever known. No one could seriously oppose the strongest army in all of history. 62 Therefore, we are before a triumphal march without precedent. I consider the Russian military force to be very weak, even weaker than the Führer believes. If anything is a sure thing, it is this. 63 In fact, Hitler is no less confident. Some months earlier with the Bulgarian diplomat he referred to the Soviet army as but a joke. 64 However, from the start the invaders found, despite everything, unpleasant surprises. On June 25, during the first aerial attack on Moscow, the anti-aircraft defenses proved to be so effective that the Luftwaffe is forced to limit itself to a reduced amount of night raids. 65 It took only 10 days of war for the pre-war assumptions to be shaken. On July 2, Goebbels writes in his diary, "Overall, the fighting is hard and stubborn. We can in no way speak of a walk in the park. The Red regime mobilized the people." 66 This course of events continued on and the mood of the Nazi leaders changed radically, as is repeatedly demonstrated in the diary written by Goebbels. July 24, quote, "We can have no doubt whatsoever about the fact that the Bolshevik regime, which has existed for nearly a quarter of a century, left its mark on the peoples of the Soviet Union. Therefore, it would be right to announce and with great clarity, before the German people, the difficulty of the struggle that rages in the East. It's necessary to say to the nation that this operation is very difficult, but that we can overcome it and that we will overcome it." Quote 67 August 1, quote, "In the Führer's headquarters it's also openly admitted that they were somewhat mistaken in their evaluation of the Soviet military force. The Bolsheviks reveal a greater resistance than we had suspected, in particular, the material resources available to them were greater than we thought." Unquote 68 August 19, quote, "Privately, the Führer is very irritated with himself for having been misled to such an extent, regarding the strength of the Bolsheviks, by the reports coming from the Soviet Union. In particular, the underestimation of the enemy's armored vehicles and planes caused us many problems. He suffers a lot because of this. We're dealing with a grave crisis." Put in comparison, the previous campaigns were like a walk in the park. Regarding the West, the Führer has no reason to worry. "With rigor and objectivity, we Germans always overestimated the enemy, except in this case with the Bolsheviks." Unquote 69 September 16, quote, "We have totally underestimated the strength of the Bolsheviks." Unquote 70 Scholars in military strategy stress the unforeseen difficulties that soon challenged that powerful war machine, experienced and cloaked in the myth of invincibility upon its entry into the Soviet Union. 71 The Battle of Smolensk, in the second half of July 1941, is particularly significant for the success of the Eastern Front. 72 The observation is from an illustrious German historian who passes on these eloquent entries from a diary written by General Fedor von Bock from the 20th and 26th of July. Quote, "The enemy seeks to recapture Smolensk at all costs and is constantly sending in new forces. The theory expressed by some that the enemy acts without plans is not reflected in the facts. We've verified that the Russians have brought up across the front a new and compact deployment of forces. In many areas they seek to go on the offensive. It's surprising for an adversary which suffered so many blows. They must possess an unbelievable amount of resources. In fact, our troops still lament the power of the enemy artillery." Unquote. Even more worried, or even decidedly pessimistic, is Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, leader of counter-espionage, who, in speaking with General von Bock on July 17, says, "I see it as very bleak." 73 Not only does the Soviet army not break down in the first days and weeks of the assault but, to the contrary, it offers tenacious resistance. and is also well commanded, as revealed by, among other things, the decision by Stalin at the time of halting the German advance at a point decided by him. The results of this astute military command are revealed as well in the diplomatic sphere. It is precisely because it is impressed by the fierce battle around Smolensk that Japan, present there as an observer, decides to reject the request by the Third Reich for it to join the war against the Soviet Union. 74 The analysis of the vehemently anti-communist German historian is fully confirmed by Russian scholars who distinguished themselves as champions in the struggle against Stalinism in the wake of the Khrushchev Report. The plans of the Blitzkrieg were already sunk by the middle of July. 75 In this context, in no way formal is the tribute paid to the Soviet Army's splendid defense by Churchill and F.D. Roosevelt on August 14, 1941.76 Even outside diplomatic and governing circles, in Great Britain, we are informed by a diary entry from Beatrice Webb, common citizens, including those of a conservative orientation, show lively interest in their surprising courage and initiative, as well as the magnificent equipment of the Russian armed forces, the only sovereign state able to oppose the almost mythical power of Hitler's Germany. 77 In Germany itself, just 3 weeks after the start of Operation Barbarossa, rumors start to circulate which deeply question the regime's triumphalist line. It's what appears in the diary of an eminent German intellectual of Jewish origin. Judging by appearances, in the East we suffer immense losses. We had underestimated the strength of the resistance by the Russians, which was inexhaustible in terms of men and military resources. 78 For a long time read as an example of political military ignorance or even blind faith in the Third Reich, the extremely cautious approach by Stalin in the weeks leading up to the outbreak of hostilities now appears under new light. The concentration of forces by the Wehrmacht along the entire front with the USSR, the violation of Soviet airspace, and another number of provocations had a single aim: attract the bulk of the Red Army as close as possible to the border. Hitler intended to win the war in a single, gigantic battle. Even valiant generals were enticed by this trap, and expecting the onslaught of the enemy, insisted on a massive relocation of troops toward the border. Stalin categorically rejected the request, insisting on the necessity of maintaining plenty of reserves at a considerable distance from the front line. Later, after reading the strategic plans by Operation Barbarossa's architects, Marshal Georgy Zhukov recognized the correctness of the line pursued by Stalin. Hitler's orders counted on the relocation of the bulk of our troops toward the border, with the intention of surrounding them and destroying them. 79 As a matter of fact, in the months following the invasion of the USSR, arguing with his generals, Hitler observed, the problem of the Russian territory. The infinite width of the territory makes concentrating on decisive points necessary. 80 Later, in a conversation he clarified his thinking about the already initiated Operation Barbarossa. In world history there had been until now only 3 battles of annihilation, Cannae, Sedan, and Tannenberg. We can be proud of the fact that 2 of them had been victoriously fought by German armies. However, for Germany the third and greatest battle of annihilation and submission, which Hitler had longed for, is increasingly complicated, and 1 week later he sees himself obligated to recognize that Operation Barbarossa had seriously underestimated the enemy. The military preparations by the Russians must be considered incredible. 81 The desire by the chess player to justify the failure of his forecasts is apparent here. However, the previously cited English military scholar reaches the same conclusions. The reason for the French defeat lies not in the quantity or quality of their resources, but in their military doctrine. Further, an excessively advanced deployment of the army had a disastrous effect, because it gravely compromised their strategic flexibility. A similar mistake was made in Poland as well, driven by national pride and overconfidence in the soldiers. None of this happened in the Soviet Union. 82 More important than the individual battles is the overall picture. The Stalinist system was able to mobilize the immense majority of the population and nearly all resources, Particularly extraordinary was the Soviet ability, in such a difficult situation as the one that arose in the first months of the war, of evacuating and later reconverting to military production a considerable number of industries. Yes, created 2 days after the German invasion, the evacuation committee managed to move to the east 1,500 major industrial companies, after titanic operations of great logistic complexity. 83 Moreover, that process of relocation had already begun in the weeks or months before Hitler's aggression, which is another confirmation of the fanciful character of the accusation delivered by Khrushchev. There's more. To some degree, the Soviet leadership understood the scenario of the war looming on the horizon as they were promoting the industrialization of the country. With a radical turn with respect to the previous situation, they identified Asian Russia as a key point, at a distance to and sheltered from possible aggressors. 84 In fact, Stalin had insisted repeatedly and vigorously on this. On January 31, 1931, he pushes forward the creation of a new and well-equipped industrial base in the Ural Mountains, Siberia, and Kazakhstan. A few years later, the report read on January 26, 1934, at the 17th Congress of the CPSU had with satisfaction called attention to the powerful industrial development that has been achieved in Central Asia, Kazakhstan, in the Tatar, Buryat and Bashkirian republics, in the Ural Mountains, in eastern and western Siberia, in the Far East, etc. 85 Trotsky didn't miss the implications of all this a few years later while analyzing the dangers of war and the Soviet Union's level of preparation, and in highlighting the results achieved by the planned economy in the military sphere, he observed, the industrialization of remote regions, especially Siberia, gives the steppes and forest regions new importance. 86 Only now does the great territorial expanse assume its full value, making the lightning warfare traditionally favored and prepared for by the German High Command more difficult than ever. It's precisely in the field of the industrial apparatus built in preparation for the war where the Third Reich is confronted with even more bitter surprises, as shown in Hitler's notes, November 29, 1941. How is it possible that such a primitive people can reach such technical objectives in such a short period of time? 87 August 26, 1942. With respect to Russia, it is incontestable that Stalin raised the standard of living. The Russian people don't go hungry. In general, it's necessary to recognize that they have built factories of similar importance to Hermann Göring Reichswerke where 2 years ago nothing but unknown villages existed. We come across railway lines that aren't on the maps. 88 At this time, it's worthwhile to consult 3 scholars, each very different. The first, who was director of the Soviet Institute of Military History and who participated in the militant anti-Stalinism of the Gorbachev years, appears motivated by the intention of furthering and radicalizing the investigations by the Khrushchev report. However, from the results of the study he feels obligated to formulate a much more nuanced judgment, without being an expert, much less the genius portrayed by official propaganda. Even in the years before the start of the war, Stalin gives particular attention to issues of defense, the defense industry, and the war economy as a whole. Yes, at the strictly military level, only through effort and mistakes, including serious mistakes, and thanks to the hard practice of daily military life, he gradually learns the principles of strategy. 89 In other fields, his thinking proves to be more developed than many Soviet military leaders. Thanks as well to the long experience of managing political power, Stalin never loses sight of the central role of the war economy and he contributed to strengthening the USSR's resistance with the relocation of war industry to the interior. It's almost impossible to overestimate the importance of that enterprise. 90 Finally, the Soviet leader paid great attention to the moral-political dimension of the war. In that field, he had totally unconventional ideas, as shown by the courageous military decision of celebrating the anniversary of the October Revolution on November 7 of 1941, in a besieged Moscow harassed by the Nazi enemy. In conclusion, One can say that, with respect to career military officers and his inner circle, Stalin demonstrated his more universal mindset. 91 It is a mindset, we can add, that doesn't neglect any of the smallest aspects of the life and morale of the soldiers, informed that they didn't have cigarettes, and thanks as well to his ability to handle an enormous workload, at a crucial moment in the Battle of Stalingrad, found time to call Akaki Mgladze, party chief in Abkhazia, the principal region for the production of tobacco. Our soldiers can no longer smoke. Without cigarettes, the front won't hold. 92 In their positive evaluation of Stalin as a military leader, two Western authors go further. While Khrushchev stresses the overwhelming initial successes of the Wehrmacht, the first of the aforementioned experts references these same facts in very different terms. It's not shocking that the largest invasion in military history had achieved initial successes. The response of the Red Army after the devastating blows by the German invasion in June of 1941 was the greatest feat of arms that the world had ever seen. 93 The second scholar, a professor at an American military academy, starting from the understanding of the conflict in terms of its long duration, the attention given to the rear and the front, its economic and political dimension, as well as the military aspect of the war, speaks of Stalin as a great strategist, and the first true strategist of the 20th century. 94 Obviously we can debate and qualify these flattering judgments. It's true however, at least as it relates to the topic of war, that the evaluation made by Khrushchev loses all credibility. Even more so because, at this crucial moment, the USSR proved itself quite prepared from another essential point of view. Let us again consult Goebbels, who upon explaining the unforeseen difficulties of Operation Barbarossa, points to another factor besides the enemy's military power, quote, "For our men of confidence and our spies, it was almost impossible to penetrate the Soviet interior. We couldn't get a precise overview. The Bolsheviks made a great effort in fooling us. Of the kinds of arms that they possessed, especially heavy weapons, we didn't have a clue. It was the exact opposite to what had taken place in France, where we knew everything in practice and couldn't be surprised in any way." Unquote. 95.